Hey there, and welcome to this explainer. So, have you ever picked up a really famous ancient text and just stopped to wonder who actually put the ink on this parchment? Today, we're diving into a bit of a historical whodunit regarding some of the world's most famous texts. We're going to explore the paradox of the missing authors in the Bible and discover exactly why some of its absolute greatest books are entirely anonymous.
I want to pose this question to you right off the bat. Think about it. Who actually wrote the most influential books in history? We often just assume we know exactly who penned these foundational manuscripts, mostly because of long-standing tradition. But when you really look closely at the texts themselves, it paints a much more surprising picture. Okay, let's dive into this by clearly defining our terms. Basically, authorship falls into three distinct buckets. First, you have books where the author is explicitly named right there in the text, like Paul's letters, for instance. Second, you have books traditionally attributed to a specific person by later readers, but the text itself is actually completely silent on the matter. And third, you have books where the author is just genuinely unknown. It's really those second and third buckets that are the most intriguing to us today.
And when you look at the sheer scale of the mystery, it's pretty shocking. We are not talking about obscure, minor texts here, folks. We are talking about the heavy hitters. Foundational books like Job, Judges, Samuel, Kings, Esther, and formally speaking, even the four Gospels. For scholars looking strictly at the evidence within the text, the authors of a massive portion of Scripture are just completely unidentified.
Section 1. Elevating the message.
So most people approach an anonymous book as a historical bug, like a puzzle that needs to be solved. But what if it's actually a profound literary feature? Take one of the most sophisticated books in the New Testament, Hebrews. Unlike a typical letter from Paul that boldly starts off with Paul, an apostle, Hebrews has absolutely zero author introduction. Because it's written in such brilliant Greek, early Christians rattled off this rapid-fire list of suspects. Maybe it was Paul, Barnabas, Luke, Apollos, Priscilla. But the truth is, none of them can be proven.
In fact, the mystery is literally so deep that the brilliant 3rd century scholar Origen essentially just threw his hands up in defeat. He famously declared, "Who wrote the epistle? God only knows." And that pretty much cements the genuinely unknown nature of the text. But you have to ask yourself, why write a total masterpiece and then purposefully leave your name off of it?
Well, the crucial point is this. It's all about focus. Hebrews is completely obsessed with one central truth, which is that Jesus is greater. He's greater than the angels, greater than Moses, the priesthood, everything. By making the messenger completely invisible, the author ensures that this core message occupies the entire foreground of the reader's attention. The author disappears so that Christ can become everything. The anonymity itself serves the theme perfectly.
Section 2. Universalizing the human experience. You know, sometimes taking away the author's identity actually broadens a text's impact. Take the book of Job, which is a total masterpiece of ancient poetry with an entirely unknown author. Notice how the author describes Job right at the start. He isn't anchored as an Israelite or a powerful king or a priest. He is simply described as a man. By stripping away that specific political or historical context, the book transcends its own culture. It allows every single reader to step right into Job's shoes and ask that deeply universal question: why do righteous people suffer?
And this technique of the invisible narrator is used powerfully in other places too. In the book of Judges, an unnamed narrator acts almost like an objective courtroom witness, coldly presenting the raw facts of a nation's moral failure without ever inserting their own ego into the mix. And in Jonah, well, being anonymous allows the writer to present a surprisingly embarrassing outside critique of the prophet himself. Think about it. If Jonah wrote it, it's a weird autobiography. But if an anonymous critic wrote it, it suddenly becomes a sharp, prophetic lesson about God's compassion versus human prejudice.
Section 3. Hidden authors, hidden providence.
Okay, this brings us to what I think is a super fascinating literary mirroring. Notice this simple equation. A concealed author mirrors a concealed God. Think about books like Ruth and Esther for a second. In those stories, there are no parting seas, no booming voices from heaven. God's hand is quietly hidden in the background, working through totally everyday events. And beautifully, the author's identity is completely hidden right along with him. Take Esther, for example. The book of Esther famously never mentions God explicitly, not even a single time. Everything that happens just looks like a mere coincidence. Perfect timing, a king's random sleeplessness, banquets, sudden discoveries. Yet divine providence absolutely saturates these events from start to finish. The literary strategy of the unnamed author perfectly matches the reality of the hidden God they are writing about. It's just an incredible artistic parallel.
And we see this scale up massively when we look at national histories, like the books of Samuel and Kings. These weren't just written overnight. They were compiled from meticulously named historical sources, like the Acts of Solomon. But the final editor, who pulled the whole shebang together, scholars actually just call them the Deuteronomistic historian because their actual identity is completely lost to history.
And guys, the irony here is absolutely profound. We know the names of nearly every single human king in these texts. They are thoroughly documented, yet they constantly fail. But the historian who meticulously recorded God's enduring covenant, they remain totally unnamed. The anonymity reinforces the message that human rulers are temporary, but God's purposes endure forever.
Section 4. A legacy of faithfulness.
Let's bring this ancient literary reality into our modern perspective. Even in the New Testament Gospels, we see this incredible humility on display. Ancient biographies almost always elevated the author, but not the evangelists. Matthew completely disappears from his own narrative, Mark never inserts himself, Luke is quiet, and John only refers to himself obliquely. They were completely content to stand behind the curtain so that the reader encounters Jesus and not them.
So the crucial takeaway here is this really sharp contrast in values. Our modern culture is totally obsessed with celebrity, right? We want our names on our work, we want recognition, legacy, we want the credit. But these ancient texts show us a totally different value system, one that honors faithfulness and the radical willingness to be entirely forgotten just as long as the truth is preserved.
In the end, these unknown authors totally accomplished exactly what they set out to do. They embodied this guiding principle spoken by John the Baptist. He must increase, but I must decrease. Their true desire wasn't to see their own names etched in stone for all time. It was to ensure that God's voice would endure through the ages. And because they were willing to just step out of the way, it did. The authors of Hebrews, Job, and Esther literally shaped world history for millennia, yet we have absolutely no idea who they actually are. It really reframes how we view our own work today, doesn't it? So I'll leave you with this. Are you willing to be forgotten if it means your impact endures forever? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I will see you next time.